Bonjour! I'm here today to talk to you about reflexive verbs in French. So maybe you're one of those people, and I know a lot of people who say, oh yeah, reflexive verbs, I probably should be using those more, but I just get confused and I don't know how to do it. So let me just put you at ease by telling you a short little story, something that happened to me when I was learning French, and it has to do with reflexive verbs and using them incorrectly. And once you use them incorrectly and you realize what it was that you said, you'll want to know how to learn reflexive verbs and how to use them correctly, because it really, really makes a big difference in expressing yourself and communicating. So here's the little story. I had just met who was to be my future husband, and so I went to visit him. He's French. So I went to visit him in Paris, and my French was not so good, I guess. Well, at least the spoken part I had a little bit of a hard time with, and reflexive verbs were super hard for me. So I wanted to tell him, well, let me tell you what I told him, and then what I actually wanted to tell him and the mistake I made. So I said to him, je sens bon. Okay, so if you speak French and you understand that, you know that it means I smell good. That's not what I wanted to tell him. I wanted to say, I feel good. First mistake was not using reflexive verb. I used the verb sentir, which means like to smell, instead of se sentir, which means to feel. Second mistake I made is I used the adjective bon instead of the adverb bien. So I really said, oh, you know what? I smell good. And he just kind of looked at me and he laughed. He was like, oh yeah, it's true. You do. But then I told him, wait a minute, what I wanted to say was I feel good. So he gave me my first lesson in French reflexive verbs. He said, well, you have to say je me sens bien. So voilà, hopefully that puts you at ease and you can know that I've been there. I know what it's like to make mistakes in French, and now I know how to help you get beyond some of those fears and start speaking French correctly with confidence. So today we're going to talk about reflexive verbs. What is a reflexive verb? Well, they're called reflexive verbs because really, usually, these are things that a person is doing to himself or to herself. Usually. There are some idiomatic reflexive verbs that really don't translate very well when you do a literal translation from French to English, but the majority of reflexive verbs are things that one person does to oneself. Okay, so an example would be the infinitive se coucher. Se coucher. Have you ever seen that? Have you ever seen an infinitive with a se, S-E, in front of it? Well, the se is there to indicate, first of all, this is a reflexive verb, and also to remind you that when you are conjugating a verb, you have to use a reflexive pronoun. So it's not always se, it depends on the subject. So the reflexive pronoun that goes along with je would be me, M-E. The one that goes along with tu is te, T-E. And the one that goes with il, elle, on is se, S-E. Now the one that goes with nous is nous. So that's how you end up with two nous right next to each other. And the same thing is true for vous. The reflexive pronoun for vous is vous. And then the reflexive pronoun for the il and elle plural form is se, just like it is for the singular form. So voila, you have your reflexive pronouns. Now what you have to do is put them into the right order when you're making a sentence. So if we use that example, se coucher, again, and you want to say, so what does se coucher mean? It means literally to put oneself to bed, or to go to bed. So if you want to say, I go to bed at 10 o'clock, you say je, and then you change the reflexive pronoun to me, and then you conjugate the verb the regular way. Coucher is a regular ER verb, so you just follow the regular conjugation. Je me couche à 10 heures. Tu te couches à 10 heures. Il, elle, on se couche à 10 heures. Nous nous couchons à 10 heures. Vous vous couchez à 10 heures. Il se couche à 10 heures. You see how that works? So, another thing that's really important that gets people tripped up somehow is, well, now what if I want to say, I don't go to bed at 10 o'clock? you need the ne and the pas, or any other kind of negation that you want to use. The important thing is to know where to put the ne and where to put the pas. So with reflexive pronouns, good thing to remember is that all pronouns in French work the same way as far as placement goes in the sentence. So if you've dealt with any other pronouns, you know that they always come right before the verb that they're directly linked to. So in the present tense, in our example, je me couche, that verb, the verb is couche, so you put the me right in front of it. Those two can't be separated. So the ne and the pas go around the pronoun and the verb. If I want to say, I don't go to bed at 10 o'clock, I say, je ne me couche pas à 10 heures. Tu ne te couches pas à 10 heures. Il ne se couche pas à 10 heures. Nous ne nous couchons pas à 10 heures. Vous ne vous couchez pas à 10 heures. Il ne se couche pas à 10 heures. All right? So another thing that you need to know is how to use these in the passé composé. So now you start thinking, all right, I've got it in the present tense. I knew everything that you told me, but it's the passé composé that gets me mixed up. Well, there are some special rules that go along with using reflexive verbs in the passé composé. And if this is going a little bit fast for you, or you would like to see the lesson in written form and you'd like to practice it a bit yourself, you can click on the link that I'm providing for you here and then also down in the description. And there is a downloadable lesson file, and it's got all kinds of examples. Everything is really spelled out, the rules, and you've got some homework there, some exercises with the answers provided. So if you feel like you need that, then don't hesitate, because the downloadable file is provided for you. All right, so back to the passé composé with reflexive verbs. Very first thing you should remember is that all reflexive verbs use the helping verb être. You may have learned when you studied the passé composé before that the vast majority of verbs use avoir as helping verb, and that there's a list of 17 or so verbs that use être in the passé composé. It's true, that is true, but to add to the list that you learned, and maybe you learned it in the form of a Dr. and Mrs. P. Vandertramp or something like that, you have to add any verb that's reflexive uses être as a helping verb. So what do you know about using être as helping verb? What do you always have to do, or what do you usually have to do to the past participle? You have to add either an E if your subject is feminine, or you have to add an S if your subject is plural. Sometimes you have to add an E and an S if your subject is feminine and plural. So we know we have to use être as helping verb with reflexive verbs. So if I have a sentence like je me couche, right? I go to bed. I'm going to put it in the passé composé like this. Je me suis couché. So you notice now that the pronoun comes before the helping verb. Again, it's the same for all pronouns in French. In the passé composé, your pronoun comes before the helping verb, whether it be avoir or être. So, je me suis couché. Since I'm the one saying this, and it's me, Jennifer, that means the subject is feminine. It means that also the reflexive pronoun, me, is referring to a feminine subject. So what I'm really making agreement with is the reflexive pronoun that's feminine. Since I'm saying it, je me suis couché, I have to add an E to coucher. So if you say, for example, il s'est couché, that's the passé composé, il, S apostrophe E-S-T, because it's the verb être. Il s'est couché. You don't have any agreement to make on coucher because il, it's he, it's singular, and it's masculine. Now, if you say something like nous sommes couchés, you have to always add an S to coucher because nous is always plural. Remember that nous, if you're talking about a group of feminine subjects, then you would also have to add an E. Just one more thing, if you want to make a sentence that's in the passé composé negative, can you guess where you would put the negation? I bet you can. Since I told you that the pronoun can never be separated from the verb that it's directly linked to, In the passé composé, that verb is the helping verb. It's the verb être in this case. So if I want to say, I didn't go to bed, without the negation, it's je me suis couché. I went to bed. And with the negation, it's je ne me suis pas couché. All right? So again, if you want to download the PDF file that's available for you, then you'll get a lot more in the way of explanation and examples and seeing it written down on paper or on your screen. One more thing. I know I said one more thing, but now there's one more thing to add to that. If you, and this can be tricky, we're talking about passé composé with reflexive verbs. Many times reflexive verbs, since they're things we do to ourselves, they're going to involve some kind of body part. For example, the reflexive verb se laver, L-A-V-E-R, means to wash oneself. So if I want to say, I wash my hair, I say je me lave les cheveux. If I want to make that negative, I say je ne me lave pas les cheveux. If I want to put it in passé composé, how do I say it? Did you get it? Je me suis lavé les cheveux. And if I want to make that negative, je ne me suis pas lavé les cheveux. So here we come back to this body part rule. Les cheveux, it's a body part, right? If you have a body part following the past participle, in this case it's the past participle laver, with an E, accent aigu, as the last letter. Even though I'm Jennifer, so I'm je, and je is feminine, since there's a body part that follows the past participle, guess what? This is why we love French. You're not going to make agreement. Because technically it's a direct object and there's a rule that says, voila, okay? Just understand that with body parts and reflexive verbs in the passé composé, you don't have to make agreement. I think you can do that. I know that you can. So I hope this lesson has been helpful to you. And let me know in the comments if you have any questions or anything at all. And I'll be back at you next week with another video. Merci beaucoup. Au revoir.